We shouldn't teach great books, we should teach a love of reading. Knowing the contents of a few works of literature is a trivial achievement. Being inclined to go on reading is a great achievement. A failure is not always a mistake, it may simply be the best one can do under the circumstances. The real mistake is to stop trying. The only geniuses produced by the chaos of society are those who do something about it. Chaos breeds geniuses. It offers a man something to be a genius about. Education is what survives when what has been learned has been forgotten. A person who has been punished is not thereby simply less inclined to behave in a given way. At best, he learns how to avoid punishment. No one asks how to motivate a baby. A baby naturally explores everything it can get at, unless restraining forces have already been at work. And this tendency doesn't die out, it's wiped out. The real question is not whether machines think but whether men do. The mystery which surrounds a thinking machine already surrounds a thinking man. We are only just beginning to understand the power of love because we are just beginning to understand the weakness of force and aggression. What is love except another name for the use of positive reinforcement? Or vice versa. A 4th grade reader may be a 6th grade mathematician. The grade is an administrative device which does violence to the nature of the developmental process. Some of us learn control, more or less by accident. The rest of us go all our lives not even understanding how it is possible, and blaming our failure on being born the wrong way. If freedom is a requisite for human happiness, then all that's necessary is to provide the illusion of freedom. At this very moment enormous numbers of intelligent men and women of goodwill are trying to build a better world. But problems are born faster than they can be solved. It is a surprising fact that those who object most violently to the manipulation of behavior nevertheless make the most vigorous effort to manipulate minds. A scientist may not be sure of the answer, but he's often sure he can find one. And that's a condition which is clearly not enjoyed by philosophy. The mob rushes in where individuals fear to tread. Democracy is the spawn of despotism. And like father, like son, democracy is power and rule. It's not the will of the people, remember, it's the will of the majority. The majority of people don't want to plan. They want to be free of the responsibility of planning. What they ask for is merely some assurance that they will be decently provided for. The rest is a day-to-day enjoyment of life. That's the explanation for your father divines. People naturally flock to anyone they can trust for the necessities of life. They are the backbone of a community, solid, trustworthy, essential. Society attacks early, when the individual is helpless. It enslaves him almost before he has tasted freedom. Theologies will tell you how it's done. Theology calls it building a conscience or developing a spirit of selflessness. Psychology calls it the growth of the superego. Considering how long society has been at it, you'd expect a better job. But the campaigns have been badly planned and the victory has never been secured. It is not a question of starting. The start has been made. It's a question of what's to be done from now on. A piece of music is an experience to be taken by itself. Society attacks early, when the individual is helpless. Not everyone is willing to defend a position of not knowing. There is no virtue in ignorance for its own sake. Going out of style isn't a natural process, but a manipulated change which destroys the beauty of last year's dress in order to make it worthless. We do not choose survival as a value, it chooses us. Men build society and society builds men. Promising paradise or threatening hellfire is, we assumed, generally admitted to be unproductive. It is based upon a fundamental fraud which, when discovered, turns the individual against society and nourishes the very thing it tries to stamp out. What Jesus offered in return of loving one's enemies was heaven on earth, better known as peace of mind. In the world at large we seldom vote for a principle or a given state of affairs. We vote for a man who pretends to believe in that principle or promises to achieve that state. We don't want a man, we want a condition of peace and plenty, or, it may be, war and want, but we must vote for a man. But restraint is the only one sort of control, and absence of restraint isn't freedom. It's not control that's lacking when one feels free, but the objectionable control of force. Each of us has interests which conflict the interests of everybody else. Everybody else we call society. It's a powerful opponent and it always wins. Oh, here and there an individual prevails for a while and gets what he wants. Sometimes he storms the culture of a society and changes it to his own advantage. But society wins in the long run, for it has the advantage of numbers and of age. Severe punishment unquestionably has an immediate effect in reducing a tendency to act in a given way. This result is no doubt responsible for its widespread use. We instinctively attack anyone whose behavior displeases us, perhaps not in physical assault, but with criticism, disapproval, blame, or ridicule. Whether or not there is an inherited tendency to do this, the immediate effect of the practice is reinforcing enough to explain its currency. In the long run, however, punishment does not actually eliminate behavior from a repertoire, and its temporary achievement is obtained at tremendous cost in reducing the overall efficiency and happiness of the group. p. 190. Society already possesses the psychological techniques needed to obtain universal observance of a code which would guarantee the success of a community or state. The difficulty is that these techniques are in the hands of the wrong people, or, rather, there aren't any right people. Any single historical event is too complex to be adequately known by anyone. It transcends all the intellectual capacities of men. Our practice is to wait until a sufficient number of details have been forgotten. Of course, things seem simpler then. Our memories work that way. We retain the facts which are easiest to think about. The consequences of an act affect the probability of its occurring again. The tender sentiment of the one and only has less to do with constancy of heart than with singleness of opportunity. The most effective alternative process to punishment is probably extinction. This takes time but is much more rapid than allowing the response to be forgotten. The technique seems to be relatively free of objectionable byproducts. We recommend it, for example when we suggest that a parent pay no attention to objectionable behavior on the part of his child. If the child's behavior is strong only because it has been reinforced by getting a rise out of the parent, it will disappear when this consequence is no longer forthcoming. p. 192. Something doing every minute may be a gesture of despair or the height of a battle against boredom. Fame is also won at the expense of others. Even the well-deserved honors of the scientist or man of learning are unfair to many persons of equal achievements who get none. When one man gets a place in the sun, the others are put in a denser shade. From the point of view of the whole group there's no gain whatsoever, and perhaps a loss. It is a mistake to suppose that the whole issue is how to free man. The issue is to improve the way in which he is controlled. The severest trial of oppression is the constant outrage which one suffers at the thought of the oppressor. What Jesus discovered was how to avoid the inner devastations. His technique was to practice the opposite emotion. A man may not get his freedom or possessions back, but he's less miserable. It's a difficult lesson. Why did colleges make their students take examinations, and why did they give grade? What did a grade really mean? When a student studied, did he do anything more than read and think, or was there something special which no one in Walden Two would know about? Why did the professors lecture to the students? Were the students never expected to do anything except answer questions? Was it true that students were made to read books they were not interested in? The real problem is not whether machines think but whether men do. In a world of complete economic equality, you get and keep the affections you deserve. You can't buy love with gifts or favors, you can't hold love by raising an inadequate child, and you can't be secure in love by serving as a good scrub woman or a good provider. Freedom is an illusion, but a valuable one. The world's a poor standard. Any society which is free of hunger and violence looks bright against that background. Your liberals and radicals all want to govern. They want to try it their way to show that people will be happier if the power is wielded in a different way or for different purposes. But how do they know? Have they ever tried it? No, it's merely their guess. The amateur doesn't appreciate the need for experimentation. He wants his experts to know. Nowadays, everybody fancies himself an expert in government and wants to have a say. 2,500 years ago it might have been said that man understood himself as well as any other part of his world. Today he is the thing he understands least. Physics and biology have come a long way, but there has been no comparable development of anything like a science of human behavior. Greek physics and biology are now of historical interest only. No modern physicist or biologist would turn to Aristotle for help, but the dialogues of Plato are still assigned to students and cited as if they threw light on human behavior. Aristotle could not have understood a page of modern physics or biology, but Socrates and his friends would have little trouble in following most current discussions of human affairs. And as to technology, we have made immense strides in controlling the physical and biological worlds, but our practices in government, education, and much of economics, though adapted to very different conditions, have not greatly improved. We can scarcely explain this by saying that the Greeks knew all there was to know about human behavior. Certainly they knew more than they knew about the physical world, but it was still not much. Moreover, their way of thinking about human behavior must have had some fatal flaw. Whereas Greek physics and biology, no matter how crude, led eventually to modern science, Greek theories of human behavior led nowhere. If they are with us today, it is not because they possessed some kind of eternal verity, but because they did not contain the seeds of anything better. In a democracy, there is no check against despotism, because the principle of democracy is supposed to be itself a check. But it guarantees only that the majority will not be despotically ruled. The rat is always right. Once in a while a new government initiates a program to put power to better use, but its success or failure never really proves anything. In science, experiments are designed, checked, altered, repeated, but not in politics. We have no real cumulative knowledge. History tells us nothing. That's the tragedy of a political reformer. We can achieve a sort of control under which the controlled, though they are following a code much more scrupulously than was ever the case under the old system, nevertheless feel free. They are doing what they want to do, not what they are forced to do. That's the source of the tremendous power of positive reinforcement. There's no restraint and no revolt. By careful cultural design, we control not the final behavior, but the inclination to behave, the motives, desires, the wishes. The hero is a device which the historian has taken over from the layman. He uses it because he has no scientific vocabulary or technique for dealing with the real facts of history, the opinions, emotions, attitudes, the wishes, plans, schemes, the habits of men. He can't talk about them, so he talks about heroes. The final state of affairs may not have been foreseen. Perhaps we are merely reading a plan into the world after the fact. In a pre-scientific society, the best a common man can do is pin his faith on a leader and give him his support, trusting in his benevolence against the misuse of the delegated power and in his wisdom to govern justly and make war successfully. The consequences of behavior determine the probability that the behavior will occur again. Science is human behavior, and so is the opposition to science. What? Compare two people, one of whom has been crippled by an accident, the other by an early environmental history which makes him lazy and, when criticized, mean. Both cause a great inconvenience to others, but one dies a martyr, the other a scoundrel. I would have been glad to agree to let them all proceed henceforth in complete ignorance of psychology, if they would forget my opinion of chocolate sodas or the story of the amusing episode on a Spanish streetcar.